Attention! Our democracy is under attack. Healthcare, voting rights, reproductive justice is under attack. Gender equality, fairness are under attack. Criminal justice is under attack. Attention! Our democracy is under attack.
Okay, well, I come off mute. Welcome to this evening's Democracy Under Attack event. My name is Anisha Hardy. I am the Executive Director of Alabama Values, and I will be your moderator for this timely and critical discussion. So this evening is made possible through our collaboration with the Groundworks Project and the Southern Leadership for Voter Education. Collectively, we set out to amplify the coordinated attacks on democracy happening across the South and to connect these issues to people's front door to increase awareness and engagement. So let's dive in. So, why are we here this evening? Well, kicking off the recent redistricting cycle, there was a sense that this would be a unique and challenging redistricting cycle, as it was the first in several decades where states such as Alabama, Louisiana, and other states with a history of discriminating, with discriminating practices within their redistricting process was not required to submit their maps to obtain pre-clearance from the Justice Department to ensure that these maps did not discriminate or dilute political power based on race, color, or membership in a protected language minority group. And this was as a result of the 2013 Shelby v. Holder case. Now, historically, states like Alabama, Louisiana, and Tennessee and Florida have a documented history of racial discrimination being embedded in many of its social institutions, but particularly within, civic participatory activities such as voting. So, this cycle, state legislators proved why pre-clearance was a necessary part and still is a necessary part of the redistricting process. In states across the South, we saw legislators work to gerrymander districts, to dilute the voting power of Black voters. So this evening, we will dive deeper into the ongoing fight for fair maps happening across the South. And we are joined by a dynamic panel, Ashley Shelton, Zephyr Scalzetti, Seoku Franklin, and Genesis Robinson. Ashley Shelton is the executive director of the Power Coalition. I've had the opportunity to fight and strategize alongside Ashley and the Power Coalition team. And I can say that the Power Coalition isn't just a spectator in this fight. At the Power Coalition, they don't just embrace change, they truly drive it forward with an unapologetic commitment to community empowerment, voter education, and engagement, and overall just meeting people where they are to help them truly plug in to be a part of the change that they want to see in their community. Also, just to note that the Power Coalition are also plaintiffs in the Louisiana's redistricting case, Robinson versus Ardon, where they are, championing fairness, equity, and the power of the people, in the electoral process. Now, Zephyr Scalzetti, we're also, happy to have you, Zephyr, Alabama Values Senior Digital Organizer. Zephyr truly stands as a force in grassroots organizing with an extensive track record that spans across multiple grassroots organizations in Alabama. Zephyr's, served as one of the 4 Southern Coalitions for Social Justice Crowd Redistricting Fellows during Alabama's redistricting cycle. And he represented both our partners, the Alabama Election Protection Network and the Ordinary People Society. Zephyr has facilitated very impactful redistricting training sessions in our state and 4 other regional partners to educate and actively engage Alabamians around the redistricting process and voting rights. Zephyr is also the host of Alabama Values web series on all things census and redistricting. They better get these lines right, so be sure to check that out. And we're also joined by Genesis Robinson. Genesis is a driving force at, another one of our partners, Equal Ground, serving as their political director. With over a decade of experience, he's a political strategist and community organizer, truly making waves at every level of government. Genesis has experience working in the U.S. House of Representatives as a legislative assistant. Genesis' passion for change didn't stop just, in D.C. He's been a force throughout Volusia County in the Sunshine State, Florida, where he's held various political positions. Notably, in 2018, while working in the Florida legislature, he played a key role in securing Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune's rightful place in the National Sanctuary Hall collection in the U.S. Capitol. And this was a, historic achievement that ultimately shattered barriers. And then we're joined by Seoku Franklin, a political science professor and scholar activist at Middle Tennessee State University, with groundbreaking books like After the Rebellion and a forthcoming co-author work titled Losing Power. He's at the forefront of understanding and shaping Tennessee's politics, but his impact goes far beyond books. As president of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, he's a trailblazer in the field. Dr. Franklin, doesn't just teach, he actively engages, with the community. And over the years, he's partnered with, numerous groups and initiatives from community oversight now to the Tennessee Citizen Action, making a tangible difference in Tennessee. He's also involved in Tennessee's redistricting case. So I just want to thank you all so much for joining, us this evening, and I look forward to diving into this conversation. And I think it would be befitting to kick it off, with Alabama, Zephyr. I mean, it has been a 2-year battle in the state house, the courthouse, in the Supreme Court, but Alabama finally has fair maps as of October 5th. And for folks who may be catching up on everything, could you just provide a overview of how we got here? How did the court-appointed special master contribute to creating the new map, and what makes this process different from what the state legislature usually does?
It's been 2 years. I think we've felt every minute of the last 2 years. It's been a long uphill battle, but it is nice to say that we finally arrived at fair maps for our 2024 elections. So to bring us all back, just like maybe a year in the past, we're not going to go all the way back 2 years, but the Supreme Court. That's not even a year. I almost said a year back to the Supreme Court siding with Alabama voters, and I just realized no, that was a few months ago. That's how long this has been, y'all, is that I thought that was a year ago. So on June 8th, the Supreme Court, validated the lower court's decision that Alabama's 2021 congressional map was unfair. And so it enjoined that map, meaning that we couldn't use it for an upcoming election. So we have to make a new one. And the district court told Alabama, like, all right, y'all, you have until July 21st to submit a new map to us, because we're going to validate that this map actually fixes the problem with the original map. What was the problem with the original map? Well, the original map had one district out of 7 congressional districts that Alabama has. One of those districts was majority minority, majority Black, and the other 6 were not. And Alabama has a 27% Black population, a Black voting age population specifically. And when you look at Alabama's map, when you look at how voters are distributed, it is actually possible to make a second majority minority district that is politically cohesive, that is geographically cohesive. These are some things that we sometimes jump over when we talk about the need for a second majority Black district. And I'm going to touch on them really briefly because it's important for understanding why the special master made the decisions that they did. So a lot of times we say very simply, well, Alabama's 27% Black. Mississippi is X amount percent Black. I believe Louisiana is 33%. Is that correct? 33% Black. So that means 2 out of 6 districts for Louisiana, or 1 out of 7, or 2 out of 7 districts for Alabama. That's not actually the whole story. There are these things called jingles. We're not going to get into it. Just know that there's a whole bunch of court cases about this. But essentially, it's not enough just to have enough population to make more than one Black majority district. You actually have to show that they are geographically compact, so you're not just drawing from random Black populations all over the state, and that they have some sort of community of interest together, that they're politically cohesive, they vote for the same candidates. And in both Alabama, in Mississippi, in Tennessee, in Louisiana, in all of these states that have these court cases going on, that's all provable, that we have ways to draw more Black majority districts that do meet all of those verifications, that it's not just throwing people in together because they happen to be Black. There's actually a lot more to it than just that. So that all being said, the district court said, all right, we've seen many examples maps where this has been done. Now we're giving it back to you, the legislature, to do your constitutional duty and to go back and draw a fair map. And then they didn't, in the biggest surprise of the century. In fact, not only did they not draw a fair map, they drew a map that was intended to potentially go to the Supreme Court again. To try to go up in front, for a second hit or something. And it was very insulting, honestly, to all of the people who have spent time, effort, who have informed their communities, who have taken, time out of their day to go to public hearings, including the public hearings before, the legislature drew the map again. It was very insulting to see it sort of treated like a game. Like maybe some political angle to it or something, and not really understanding that these are people's lives. This is very important to Black voters in your state, and this is not what we sent you to the state house to do, to represent us. They passed an unfair map. The district court, in their in their knowingness and their smartness, actually had gone ahead and scheduled a hearing for August 14th, just before any of this even happened. They just said, we're going to see y'all in court on the 14th, come, no matter what. So we walk in on the 14th, and they were not happy, y'all. They asked, is this what we asked you to do? Pretty blatantly, to the Alabama politicians. And so as a result of that, the district court took the ability to draw maps away from Alabama's legislature, and they assigned it to a special master. So special master is just somebody who's appointed by the court to do a specific task. In this case, the special master's job was to oversee map drawing. So they have a court-ordered cartographer, map drawer that they brought on, and their job was to bring 3 proposed maps, which they did. And then we had another hearing very recently where the plaintiffs, so Black voters, and the defendants, the state of Alabama, argued for or against, the various maps, map 1, 2, and 3. And very recently, like last week, the court chose map 3 as our new map. So we have gone from a 2021 map that had 1 Black majority district to we now have 1 Black majority district and 1 Black, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting the word. Not possibility district. Anisha, help me out here.
Opportunity.
Thank you. We have 1 Black district and 1 opportunity district. So right now the stats in our new map are District 2, which is our new opportunity district, is 48.7% Black voting age population, and District 7, which was our traditional Black district, is 51.9% Black voting age population. So we did make it in a way. I will say some of the downsides of having the court take over drawing, which is something I can get into later if we want to split this question up. But some of the downsides is the court is somewhat limited in what they can change, as opposed to legislatures, which have more ability to take into account other political realities, other possibilities of what they're trying to accomplish with maps in a fair way. I'm not just talking about in a partisan way, but in a fair way to consider other factors and other variables. And courts are actually quite restrained in what they can accomplish. So you'll notice that our new map 3 looks a lot like our 2023 map. It is by the numbers much fairer, but in terms of visual changes, it hasn't actually changed that much. In fact, districts 4, 5, and 6, I believe, retain 100% core retention, meaning that they did not change at all from the plan that the Alabama legislature put together.
Okay. And Zephyr, so just, really quickly, we have new maps, and a lot of people are like, okay, now what? What happens next? Right. And I know, what are some of the things that, orgs and some of the things that voters need to be aware of? What happens next?
Okay, if you're in Alabama and you listen to nothing else tonight, please hear me for this next 2 sentences, okay? Voters need to be reassigned to their congressional districts. This will take months, if not coming very close up to November. That means for the next basically year, if you go into voter view or whatever and you check your voter registration, it might be wrong. Okay, you cannot count on voter view for your congressional districts only. Now, all of your other districts are correct. What this means for voter orgs and everything, y'all, we need to memorize this new map immediately, down to all of the little, luckily this map leaves a lot of whole counties intact. So easily we can go and say, okay, if you live in this county, you are definitely in this district. But we need to zoom in on the parts of the map where counties are split, and we need to be educating people manually. It's not enough to tell people to look up the registration. It's not enough to tell people oh, you're probably in this district or that. We've got to make sure, and we need to educate them far before November, because frankly, I think the districts will not be correct until maybe October of next year. And that's a problem. Okay. Yeah. So we have a lot of mobilization to do, a lot of voter education to do.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. So I want to kind of pivot to Louisiana because Louisiana, actually Louisiana has a similar case in Arden versus Robinson, arguing for a second majority minority district. Team AB had the opportunity to join you in the Power Coalition and other advocates for the oral arguments that took place on Friday, last Friday. Can you just provide a little context for the Louisiana case? And then also, maybe even your thoughts on how the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Alabama's case may affects the Louisiana lawsuit. And also what stood out to you at the oral arguments? Were there moments that gave you hope? Or were there moments that gave you pause or concern?
Yeah, no. Thank you for having me tonight. And it's always good to hang out with the Alabama Values team. We appreciated having y'all in town last week. We did, we stood before the Fifth Circuit to talk about a remedy, right, for the Louisiana case. And it just so happened that we were both supposed to be in court talking about liability and the remedy, and it ended up that they stayed the court date for our liability trial, and then we just went to address the appeal by the state whether or not harm, what the harm was and who it was done to. And so what is frustrating to me, there's so many thoughts, right? Like, so, one, I mean, there's definitely harm. And I think we have to stop pretending like here we are in 2023 and we are living in, a majority minority country. And now all of a sudden we want to change all the rules. And we want to use the court system to delay justice and voice and power to folks. And, and for me, what's really clear, and even in the inception of Power Coalition for Equity and Justice as an organization, we knew that redistricting was the North Star, because when you talk about power and building power for historically disenfranchised communities, you're talking about all of the ways in which you have agency and power as a citizen of whatever place you live. And so, we were very intentional and very thoughtful about the process. We had historic, unprecedented participation in redistricting, thousands of voices that came to be a part of the process throughout the road shows, which we had 10 of across the state, in addition to actually being at the Capitol for the redistricting session, the governor's veto, and then the following session to undo the governor's veto. And so it has been a long 2 years. It has been a long 2 years and a long process. But I will tell you, one thing that struck me was that the people of the state of Louisiana, the court was packed. It was standing room only. There were several folks that couldn't even get into the courthouse. And it just spoke to me that, again, I know that I deeply care about this because I've been working on it, but that there are regular everyday people that understand how important this is, how important their voices are, and how important redistricting is to their ability to elect a candidate of choice and to have another, candidate that actually reflects their values and experiences as a citizen of the state of Louisiana. And so I was very proud to see a packed courtroom. So much so that, one of the judges kept explaining what was happening because there were so many people in the court, and we were like, no, we're clear what's happening. You just keep asking your questions. And so, I was heartened. I feel positive. I've said throughout this process is that the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And if there was ever any greater example of that, it's this. And I felt like the questions were good questions. I feel like at the end of the day, everyone's very clear that we need to have a map before Purcell kicks in. And of course, Purcell being, the maps being drawn too close to qualifying for the next election, which we know will be in the fall of 2024. And so, it gave me, it gave me great promise, to think that everyone's really clear that we have to stop playing these games. We have to stop using the court as a forum to delay rights, voice, and power to Black voters. And so, so for us in Louisiana, much like Alabama, it's been a long fight. We have stood with Alabama because we understand clearly that, your fight and our fights are intertwined. Our cases are built in similar ways. And, we are 33% African-American per capita, in terms of Black population. And so having, accurate and equal representation in this state, and the fact that we had to fight for it. And I tell folks, like when folks are like, it's not that big of a deal, calm down. And I remind them, I said, well, we lost 5% white population and we gained about 3 to 5% Black and other communities of color in the state of Louisiana. And so we lost at the House level, we lost a House seat. We lost a House seat, a majority House seat. And then we're denied, this congressional seat, and have been fighting ever since. And I think that, for us, this is about also a moment of showing folks, the true power of democracy. And that, you know, at a time when people feel very disconnected from their voice, very disconnected from their agency, as, you know, as being able to do something about what's happening in their lives, you know, this moment, you know, kind of shines through for us, for, you know, Alabama to stand, you know, in this moment, in this win, and for us to hopefully, not hopefully, but when we realize
Yes.
second minority district, to remind folks that this is what the people did. Like, that, you know, like, nobody gave us this. We fought for this. We stood together, and we, you know, we continue to, you know, to fight until, you know, Norris Henderson always says, like, you just have to be willing to fight one day longer. And we are willing to fight one day longer. And so, so I'm encouraged, and, you know, we continue to be poised to fight and till the soil in this new district. I think Zephyr made a very good point about, like, what happens next, and what happens next is making sure that people understand what it means to either be in a new district. How does it, you know, like, do they need to re-register? I mean, like, you know, there's several questions that pop up, and we need to be ready to engage and work with the community ASAP once we get this district realized.
Yeah, no, definitely. One of the things, so during the hearing, there was, you know, debate over the definition of communities of interest, and the state's argument against the proposed Black district was discussed, you know, back and forth in the hearing. Can you elaborate on those arguments and counter arguments, and just how that relates to the Voting Rights Act?
Yeah, you know, I found it interesting that during the, you know, like, during the course of the debate, they kept talking about how Black people were alike, and what it meant for Black people to be in communities of interest, and how, you know, Black people living in rural Louisiana were not the same as Black people living in urban Louisiana. And I think what they forget is that, you know, like, the circumstances of Black people were created by segregation structurally through policy. And so when then you know, kind of look down the road and say, like, oh no, there's nothing, you know, there's nothing that, you know, that they experience that's the same. And it's like, no, we experience the same socioeconomic challenges. You know, the same poverty, the same amount of our children living in poverty, higher death rates, you know, and so the list goes on and on. And so I think, you know, like, that was what stuck out to me the most, is that, like, you know, unfortunately, if you're African American living in a rural city and living in, you know, that's steeped in poverty, or you're living in an, you know, urban city steeped in poverty, as a Black person, your experience is pretty much the same. I was like, and so the idea that they wanted to make such a distinction about how we have nothing in common. Well, we have the fact that we've lived in a deep South state all of our lives, sometimes generations of our families, and we absolutely, you know, have many experiences that are actually structurally put into place and systemically put into place that have nothing to do with us. And so the idea that they then want to, you know, claim that we have nothing in common, I was like, the things we have in common, you made sure we had in common. So, so that did strike me. And the other thing was that they wouldn't say Black. They only said skin. They kept saying skin color, skin color, skin color. And I just thought, you know, I think, yeah. And I think, again, like, this idea that we're post-racial, that that my experience as a Black woman in America is the same as a white woman's experience in America is insane, right? Like, we are not living the same lives. We do not have access to the same things. You know, I worry about my son leaving my home, you know, every day to go to college. I worry about all of these things that I don't think that I have to make sure that he knows all the rules, and that if he gets pulled over by the police, and, you know, and I've got to, you know that even if I call the police to my own home, like, I don't even know the circumstance upon which I would call them, because I feel like it puts my family in more jeopardy to call them. And so, I mean, I think that, again, like, this idea that we're living the same, you know, we're having the same experience is absurd to me. And also, too, like, this idea of even the absurdity of even trying to define what it means to be Black. And so we saw that too in these cases with the DOJ Black or whatever, where, you know, Black is simply defined as Black and white. And And then, but you dismiss all of the other, kind of ethnicities, whether it's, Afro-Caribbean or, any number of, combinations. But what we all know as, as Black people and folks that are, I always tease, it was like Black appearing. I don't know what any other term to tell. I was like, but if you walk in this world as a Black person, or assumed a Black person, then you're going to have a very similar experience. And the idea that is not, like the idea that is not true, or that you can define it for me, what it means for me to be Black and to be treated like a Black woman in this country is crazy to me. And I think that was, last statement about the Voting Rights Act, as we celebrate the 60th year of the Voting Rights Act, or 60th year of the March on Washington, 58th year of the Voting Rights Act. The thing for me about Section 2 was that if we would have not held Section 2, think about how it literally would have codified into law that I'm a second-class citizen. In the sense that, it's one thing for me to deal with the challenges of being a Black woman in this country. It's something totally different for you to tell me I can do absolutely nothing about who represents me, so that I can change some of the circumstances with which, my family and other families that look like mine, live within. And I think that was, for me, why we fought so hard for this, because it's 2023. I'm not going to live like that. And we're continuing to fight not only the structural ways in which, it feels like we're second class citizens, but we for sure are going to continue to fight and challenge the ways in which, they want to actually take away, the power, that Black leaders have built over the years to make sure that we actually have voice, and that, we can't keep playing to this false fairy tale that somehow we're in a post-racial America, because I feel like, I don't feel like I can give you 8,000 examples of how we are absolutely living in a country that is very much so exactly where we were 60 years ago.
Yeah. No, thank you for that insight, Ashley. I want to kick it over to Tennessee. And Seoku, Tennessee currently has a case, the Tennessee State NAACP versus Lee, that argues that Tennessee's congressional and Senate districts, specifically congressional districts connected to Davidson County, and Senate districts connected in Shelby County, were created with unlawful use of race and violates the 14th and 15th Amendments. So can you explain how the 14th and 15th Amendment and the Voting Rights Act, come into play in cases involving racially gerrymandered districts, such as the one in Tennessee?
Yeah, can I give I just want to make sure I update that I'm the past president of the Black Political Science Conference. Our current president is Emmett Riley, so shout out to him. And also the book that you mentioned is published, and our co-author, Ray Block, is also a voting rights expert redistricting person too. So shout out to him too as well. Thank you so much for inviting me. Yes, as you will know, in Tennessee, our dispute is probably is in much more in line with the South Carolina case that's going to be heard before the Supreme Court. And in voting rights, if I can get this right, in some of the disputes around voting rights, you can bring a VRA case, a voting rights case, Section 2 case, or if you were in a pre-clearance state before Shelby County, you could bring a Section 4 or 5 case. As a note, Tennessee, if I could add a little context, Anisha, Tennessee was not a Section 5, not a pre-clearance state, and part of that is due to the context of Tennessee. So we were never that. But the Shelby v. Holder decision had a chilling effect on non-pre-clearance states, and that's part of, I think, what we should probably also, in the retrospective of Shelby, look at the chilling effect that it had on Section 2 non-pre-clearance states like Tennessee and other states as well. Our Black population is much smaller than, say, for example, Georgia and Louisiana and Alabama. We're about 17% or so Black population, and then our Black population is unevenly distributed in certain parts of the state, Memphis, rural West, and then Nashville, which gets into the whole kind of section pre-clearance and so forth like that. So in some cases, in some disputes, people that are challenging voting rights claims will bring 14th Amendment claims, 14th Amendment issues, primarily around equal protection issues, that the equal protection of voters are are being violated, and due process under the 14th Amendment. And and of course that relates to the 15th Amendment, which is the right to vote. And constitutionally, it's another route to challenge bad redistricting or unfair redistricting plans. And it's in some cases it could be even a safer route if you lose as well, because it makes you're not making Section 2 vulnerable, because the right wing wants Section 2. That's their gold mine. They want to eliminate Section 2 for good. So bringing a 14th and 15th Amendment claim matters a great deal. And there's some kind of case history regarding that called the Arlington Heights factors. So it allows you to kind of link 14th Amendment claims to I'm not a lawyer, but to like intentional discrimination disputes around redistricting, how to gather evidence, how to show patterns of discrimination. So the 14th and 15th Amendment actually allows for that kind of route to bring in claims against voter violations and vote dilution. So that's why, and it's much more amenable for us here in Tennessee. While at the same time, it doesn't allow us to make Section 2 vulnerable to being struck down. And should I explain what happened in Tennessee too?
Yes, please. I was just going to say, can you
So what happened in Tennessee?
What's going on? Yeah,
we had it was a very hostile situation. Our redistricting plan, the redistricting plan that the state did, we had a lot of mobilization. We were following what was going on in Alabama, especially following what was going on in Texas. The groups, we had legal counsel. I work with the NAACP, in particular as a political action director. But our legal counsel is the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Our partners in the community and other groups are also very active. League of Women Voters, Civic Tennessee Equity Alliance. We have a group called African American Clergy Alliance as well, and Turk, which works with immigrants, and the other legal counsel that has a dominant role here is Southern Coalition for Social Justice, names that people are familiar with as well. And so we spent basically the greater part of a year in various pockets mobilizing around community-based redistricting, and ultimately we formed a pretty good alliance with many of the kind of hub or umbrella organizations like the NAACP, League of Women Voters, Civic Tennessee, and drew plans. But this, like many states, the redistricting process was rigged. At the state legislative level, we had statewide hearings. I can go on and on and talk about the high intensity community mobilization that we did. So when the state developed this, finally adopted this redistricting plan, this is what happened: is that the state legislature took Nashville, Davidson County, which has 700,000 people, and in surgical procedure they split it up into three parts. And Nashville, Davidson County is, depending upon how you want to count it, 42 to 47% persons of color, and it's a high growth county. And Middle Tennessee, which is where Nashville is a high growth region that has impacted supermajority white counties. So some of those supermajority white counties are seeing more and more people of color moving in there. So in Nashville, what they did was they broke it up into three parts, and split it up into three different congressional districts. So that, which basically meant that they essentially eliminated a Democratic Party district, and in doing that, they took one district, and now that district has a black population of black voting age population of under 10% African American. The other one is about 11 to 13% African American, and the other one is 15 to 17% African American. So they basically took Davidson County, which was a city that comprised of an entire congressional district, split into three parts, and of those three parts, they're now connected to 32 various counties. So if I were to draw a map and look at the center of Davidson County and then draw out three different areas, they're now connected to 32 different counties, most of which are rural, which basically makes up 1/3 of the counties in Tennessee. So with surgical procedure, they chopped at Davidson County, undermined an opportunity district, which is what it was. And in doing that, now in Davidson County, which is one of the highest growth counties in the country, there's all the three members of Congress that represent the district are far right Republican. But here's the thing: there's no congressional office in Davidson County. all the congressional offices are basically outside of Davidson County. So it was with surgical procedure that they basically eliminated an opportunity or crossover district in Davidson County, one that had a growing majority minority population. Probably the next 5 or 10 years is probably going to be a majority minority population, and it was quite a devastating blow. And basically, it eliminated, just kind of emphasize, it eliminated a Democratic district, not to be partisan here, overly partisan. But the reason why I mentioned that point is because the Republicans already had a 7-2 majority in the congressional delegation. So this dropped it down to 8-1. So, and then in Shelby County, they took the state Senate seat and they eliminated an opportunity district in East Shelby County, which Shelby County is where Memphis is. And the place where they eliminated an opportunity district is linked to an area that goes into rural West Tennessee that is seeing the largest economic boom in any rural community in Tennessee. They're building a big, huge $5 billion Ford plant economic development center right there to smack dab of rural West Tennessee, which is basically rural West Tennessee is the equivalent of, it's our Mississippi Delta. We call it the Tennessee Delta. So that's what happened, and that's what the suit is based upon is 14th Amendment claims around that. But I will say this, and I think the others would agree, although there is so much attention focusing on the congressional districts, if we were to just go into the redistricting plans that were proposed in most of the southern, if not all the southern states at the state legislative level, there's so many bad plans on the stove cooking that we just can't get to. We here in Tennessee, our state legislature took 99 House seats and engaged in what's called an excessive number of split counties. They split 30 to 95 counties to gain even an excessively gerrymandered and supermajority number of House seats. We saw instances at the local level in places in Tennessee, Clarksville, in Fayette County, I can go on and on, in which there were bad redistricting plans that impacted Black and brown voters, particularly Black voters. But we just didn't have the legal resources and to fight them. And the courts have become stacked with so much anti-voting rights jurists that cases that we could have won maybe 30 years ago, we're just not able to win. But I just want to make sure I pointed out that what you saw at the congressional level in many of these states, frankly, it's even worse at the state house, at the state legislative level. We just don't have the resources to really address those.
Yeah. So what would a win look like in this case? Like what needs to happen to address, the racially gerrymandering and the clear discriminatory intent you mentioned, especially in splitting Nashville into 3 congressional districts?
Well, our hope is that the legal case will gain some steam. And having worked on it, I want to be careful how I talk about it. But basically, the case tracked the exact same time frame as the Alabama case, as the Louisiana case. From as best I can tell is that we held off on filing the case, our attorneys did, to gather more evidence. But basically, missing in this narrative was the Supreme Court's abuse of the Purcell principle, that basically prevented really good, fair maps moving forward. I see Zephyr not with the nod. Yeah, for moving forward with the idea that those fair maps are coming they're too close to the election. And so what the Supreme Court has done is they took this Purcell principle that had been around for a couple of decades, and they frankly abused it, often through shadow docket opinions. And then the Supreme Court basically played jujitsu, because in Wisconsin they went the other way. So in a nutshell, what we decided to do, or what our attorney decided to do, was to not file for an injunction before the 2022 election, because of these Purcell principle rulings that came down in places like Alabama and in places like Louisiana. So in a nutshell, we held off on it. So as fast forward a year later, the case is already filed in court. We'll see where it goes. A win would look like, of course, that we win, that the courts make the determination that the plans are discriminatory, intentionally discriminatory, that they that they violate the 14th Amendment. And our hope is that if that were to be the case, then the state legislature will be forced to draw a new plan, one that encompasses Nashville as an entire congressional district, and one that deals with that state senate district. The long term win, if that were the case, is we just have to engage in a lot more. I think unless the courts shift in the next 10 years, I think heading into the redistricting cycle, only 7 years away, that's close, 7-8 years away, that's right there. I think there's going to be a lot more ways in which we have to innovatively think about legal advocacy. I think the attorneys that are going to be focusing on this, along with their community partners, are going to be re-strategizing over the next 7 to 8 years about how to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people, oftentimes we'll frame redistricting as this once in a decade process, but this is year round. Like, this fight is year round when we talk about keeping people informed, engaged, and tapped into ensuring that we have a fair redistricting process, right? And that maps are reflective of the communities, and that people have the opportunity to elect the candidate of their choice. Thank you so much, Seoku, for that. And kicking it over to Florida, Genesis. I know Florida currently has a case, Cumming Calls Florida versus Byrd, that is arguing that the Florida General Assembly and Governor DeSantis engaged in intentional racial discrimination, in violation of the 14th and 15th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, in crafting the state's current congressional map by denying Black voters the right to elect, ultimately, denying Black voters the right to elect the candidate of their choice. I would love for you to kind of dive into that case a little bit and just, what parts of the Florida constitutions were violated by this redistricting plan, particularly, regarding the rights of Black voters.
Yeah, thank you. And so, in the state of Florida, we actually have two cases that are before the courts right now. The case that you lifted up is a case that is in federal court. And my organization, Equal Ground, along with 3 other organizational plaintiffs, as well as some individual plaintiffs, filed a case that is appearing in state court. And so the case that is before the state court is presently sitting within the First District Court of Appeals, waiting for a decision. And sort of how we got here, very similar to the other stories that have been lifted up. In Florida, late last year, last year rather, when we had to redraw our congressional maps, the legislature initially defied the governor. The governor did an unprecedented step by submitting his own map and basically signaling to the legislature that he wanted them to dismantle Black representation. And however, they defied that. They passed a map that protected those seats. Yet the governor chose to veto that map, and he vetoed it, and he withheld signing the budget, right? And so it signaled to these legislators that if you wanted your projects protected, you need to come back into a special session and basically give me what it is that I'm asking for, and that's the dismantling of 2 out of Florida's 4 Black protected congressional seats. And so they did just that. They came back in from special session. They passed a map that did just that. Our organization, like I said, along with our other organizational plaintiffs, Florida Rising, Black Voters Matter, as well as the League of Women Voters, we sued in state court. And initially we won in state court, but obviously the state appealed that decision. And just as you all lifted up in the other states, our state Supreme Court used a rationale that we were too close to an election for them to take up the case. And so our 2022 election, unfortunately, had to be held with what was ruled as an unconstitutional map. And so, fast forward, a year later, the case made its way through the process, went before the court. But one of the things that was interesting in our case is the state, in a joint stipulation with us, actually admitted that there was diminishment in one of the previously protected districts. And so because of that agreement, as well as the other, evidence in the trial, on September 2nd, the courts ruled that Florida's congressional maps were unconstitutional and ordered them to be redrawn. Then again, of course, the state appealed, and we issued a joint stipulation asking for, the case to go directly to the Supreme Court. But for whatever reason, the First District Court of Appeals rejected that and decided to hear the appeal directly. So we are fearful that that could potentially slow down, us getting a new map in place ahead of the 2024 cycle. However, the courts have basically promised that they would render a decision by the end of November. And so hopefully that will give the legislature enough time to redraw a map that is favorable for voters and protects, the voting rights here in the state of Florida, as they have requested with the Fair Districts Amendments that was passed in 2010, which I didn't even get into.
Yeah. So, and you said, which we fear, right? That we'll be voting on these maps in the upcoming election. Can you just, like, for folks that may not be drawing the connection, like, where does that fear come from? Can you explain how the impact of this redistricting plan, on Black voters, like what difficulties does it pose in their electoral representation?
Well, I say first and foremost that the fear for what could come in Florida is rooted in a history of what we have seen, right? This is a Florida legislature that defied the will of voters. In 2010, Floridians voted to the tune of 64% to pass what is known as Fair District Amendments. These were amendments to our Constitution that gave specific instructions on how the legislature should, go about drawing maps. And in the same, just not even 5 years removed, not even 2 years removed from passing those amendments to the Constitution, the state did a congressional plan in 2012 that violated the very fair districts that we had just passed 2 years prior. And so it wasn't until 2016 that they were able to get that right, and Florida was able to add the congressional seat that we knew we deserved based on the population of Black folks here in the state of Florida. And so the fear and the concern that we see here in Florida is based on the reality that we have politicians that ignore the will of voters and continue to draw maps that favor their political parties, favor incumbency, and don't respect the interests of communities of interest and communities of color. And so that's where that deep-seated fear is coming from. And one more thing that I'll add here, this is all happening in the backdrop of a state that continues to pass what we believe are voter suppression laws year after year after year, right? In 2020, it was said that Florida had the safest and most secure election in the history of our state. And yet in 2021, 2022, as well as this year, we have seen massive omnibus voter suppression bills that make it more difficult for people to access the ballot box, that attack third-party voter registration organizations. And so what we're seeing with the congressional redistricting is merely another extension of those efforts to attack our democracy here in the state of Florida.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And if I could have just took a snapshot of everyone's face when you start mentioning Florida having the safest election and you brought up 2020, I mean, the smirks that went across the screen, that would have been a poster for Stop Lying.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. You all look, but that's actually a good segue into, and so I want to start getting to just, let's chat, y'all. Thank you all for grounding us. I want to, we know that redistricting and the drawing of these district lines, that they play, a pivotal role in determining the allocation of resources to communities and directly influence, the challenges and opportunities these communities encounter, particularly, marginalized communities, Black communities, people of color communities, Indigenous communities. And the way these districts are drawn affects the very foundation of our democratic system, influencing access to, representation, adequate representation, and other resources, our overall quality of life. So I want to dive into some questions that are geared around making sure that we connect this fight to people's front door and how it impacts us all. So I want to kick a question back to you, Genesis, because you started to go into this down this vein, and then I would encourage, welcome everyone to kind of chime in. But what are the biggest challenges that communities in your state are facing today as a result of unfair mapping?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's representation, right? It's not lost on any of us the value and the importance of having people who represent your interest in elected positions, making decisions on your behalf. Because the reality of it is that our elected officials hold power, and it is power that we give to them through our vote. But when maps are unfairly drawn, and you have politicians choosing who their voters will be versus voters choosing who their politicians will be, it creates a situation where people are underrepresented and their interests are not at the table. Obviously, I know this is a nonpartisan conversation, but one of the things that I think has to be said here when we're talking about Florida is you're dealing with a state, right? Prior to the 2022 congressional map going into place, Florida had 27 congressional districts. It was a 14-13 split in our congressional delegation. With the passage of this new map, and Florida also gained a congressional seat in the most recent redistricting. So now we have 28 seats. Now the split is 20-8, right? 20-8. 20 favoring the Republican Party, 8 favoring the Democratic Party. And again, this isn't a partisan conversation, but how do we go from 14-13 to 20-8, right? Something's not right there. And when you look at the margins, of the U.S. Congress and what's happening in the U.S. House of Representatives and how 8 Republicans were able to join with Democrats to oust a speaker, right? That just shows you that those seats that Florida was able to deliver on an unconstitutional map has major implications. So all of the policies, all of the harm that is done between now and us rectifying this situation will have real life implications on the people who live here in the state of Florida and who are devoid and lack congressional representation that shares their interests.
Well, and just to chime in really quickly, because I always say too that like there's nothing partisan about what you just said, right? Like at this point, we're talking about the facts, right? Like, these are literal. This is not only facts. This is a reality of our lives, and I think that it's so funny that like they want to tell us that nothing's happening, nothing's going on, but if we are moving in a place where again this country is majority minority, and instead of the fairness and the equity that we deserve, we're seeing exactly what we're seeing play out across all of these states. And again, I just don't understand that, like, oh, so now we want to change the rules because the rules don't favor you. And and I think we have to have a real conversation about that. And again, it goes back to, well, if we're so great and post-racial, then why isn't the split the other way? Because I'm pretty sure that you could probably have 20 Democratic congressional seats versus the other way around. And so I think that like that sticks with me. And I think also too the speed with which they're addressing these cases. I think like at this point they don't have a choice but to try to address this before Purcell, but we still have no promises, right? Like that this will get done before May of 2024. And so we have to keep fighting and keep pushing. But I think it's absurd that the Supreme Court says this is the law of the land and that we don't have immediate relief, right? Like, I mean, it shouldn't take months and months and months. District court, federal court. I mean, we're all over the map trying to fight for justice. And again, I tell anyone, I was like, look, I live in Louisiana. We've got one, majority minority district, and that's the one person that voted for the infrastructure bill. Everyone else voted against it. Now, Louisiana is the second poorest state in the country. So we need some infrastructure. We need a little bit of everything. And the absurdity that they would vote against their own interest, but based on their politics, right? Like the politics were more important than the people. And, and again, it just comes down to the facts that, again, the rules are the rules, and we're not going to move the ball or the goalpost, because folks are scared. And, when we even heard, again, facts, not partisanship, but facts around, like folks said, y'all just want Hakeem to be the Speaker of the House. And I was like, but if that's
the narrative now, right?
Yeah, exactly. But again, it doesn't matter who it is, but it should still be fair. I mean, so you've had a chance to put your person, like it's supposed to be fair, and there's nothing fair and equitable about anything that's happening. And also it feels less and less, it feels less and less likely that, we really get to hold justice, right? Like that, like that this arc is swinging back towards justice and they're pulling it back the other way. And I want people to realize that there is power in our voices, there's power in our votes. That's why they're so afraid. That's why there is no equity and fairness in this process. And that, these fights as they stand currently in all of our states, right? It's the people, it's the power of the people that's holding this narrative, that's making this move as fast as it is moving, that, which isn't fast enough, but faster than it would be without public outcry. We need you, and we need you to keep pushing as many places as you can, your elected leaders at every level of government, to say that we're not going to stand for this.
Yeah. No. Zephyr, I heard you come on. You was like money, right as Ashley was talking about infrastructure. I'm like, like you want to
for infrastructure, but also like in terms of making these court cases, like Seoku kind of brought this up. I mean, this has sort of been a thread in all of our answers, which is chilling effects, right? And something that I always like to bring to mind when I'm in these spaces is, we talk about congressional maps. Sometimes maybe we talk about lawsuits that are about, state senate or state house. But we very rarely are talking about city council and county commissioner seats. And let me tell you who was watching when the Supreme Court put the kibosh on, and froze the case. These local municipalities, and people do not have the money, the funds, the access to experts, to lawyers to do this. And when we do see lawsuits that start at that low level, very frequently it is something that has a horrific end effect, like Shelby v. Holder, which is Shelby County, Mobile v. Bolden. Alabama has a history of having these municipal cases become law of the land cases, and yet for the most part, I don't know if this is the case in Tennessee, and I suspect it's maybe not so much the case in Louisiana, but in Alabama, we don't have a collection of all of our municipal maps. Like I literally have, for the last 2 years, been working to track down all of our municipal maps. I couldn't tell you how many municipalities are gerrymandered, how many are legal, how many haven't redistricted in 40 years, because we don't know. That's not a priority for our state. And when the municipalities that do redistrict, I currently make my home in Auburn, Alabama. I'm sitting in Auburn right now. And this is a place that I fought very, very, very hard for fair maps about 1.5 years ago. And when I remember that the injunction on our maps, that the hold came down literally the night before the day that they adopted their maps, and they went with an unfair map. Because they're like, oh, well, we don't need to do another majority minority district. That's not, the Supreme Court clearly does not think that's a priority. People are watching. And so, yes, the Purcell principle and how it affects other states, other maps on that level, but it affects a lot of these low level folks. We also saw an expert in Alabama's case who has been, he was the Jingles One expert, and he actually was ran his own firm drawing maps for municipalities, for county commissioners, and he was essentially laughed out of court by the judiciary. So there are so few experts in the space that sometimes folks can come in and think that they understand what's going on or what have you, and they're actually giving bad advice to these municipalities, to these counties, to so really, I mean, I could go on about this for a minute. This is just so local redistricting is a special passion of mine. But also because, I think the fish rots from the head, but also like what we see on these municipal levels adds up. One of the big principles with Alabama, right, is keeping municipalities whole. And when you look at annexation patterns, right, we're getting really into the weeds here. And you look at annexation patterns, you see a racist annexation pattern. So if your focus is on keeping counties whole, counties that were drawn and done in a racist way, and then you're looking at municipalities and you want to keep those whole in your map, right? You're starting you're minimizing all the ways that you could put together a fair map by things that have been stacked against you from the get-go, right? And there's all of these ways. So when I think about material harm, I think about a trailer park that is about a mile away from where I am right now. They are surrounded by the city of Auburn. They are not actually part of the city of Auburn, something that they did not realize until I looked up the map just to double check, because I had a sneaking suspicion. There are 3 trailer parks. 2 are on one side of the road, and this trailer park is not annexed. The other 2 are. And that trailer park, the roads have not been paved. They have issues getting fire and ambulance services into there. The school bus will not come in to the complex to pick them up. Do you want to guess what the minority breakdown of the 2 trailer parks that are included in the city of Auburn versus the one that isn't? Anybody want to guess the most obvious thing in the world?
I'll bet it
You know?
all. I will bet it all. What do they look like me, Zephyr?
Anisha, it's a shocker, but they do.
Do they look
And
like?
I mean, literally, like that now, the NAACP of Lee County, like that to me, that is redistricting, right? Is that it's all of these layers. They are not part of the city, so they cannot elect people to the city council who will listen to their needs, because nobody will listen to their needs. They are drowned out in the county. Who can even address that? Who is even looking over? Why are you annexing literally a perfect square around this facility and that one little stretch of road, but you pick up the road right after their facility stops? Like this is the kind of, it's minutia, but it's the devil in the details.
Yeah.
School boards, yes, Ashley. School boards are a huge power grab.
Yeah. And thank you, Zephyr, for everyone. You can also catch Zephyr on They Better Get These Lines Right, really breaking down and unpacking, all things redistricting. I do want to take a question from the audience. We have, let's see, Erlene Von Arnold, who says, do you think that we as a people are fighting this issue enough? A lot of people are not aware that this is happening. I feel you, Erlene. You're like, knowledge is power. Alina's like, look, are we doing all that we can do, around this? And I would love for anyone to chime in and then also point out maybe some of the things that your org is doing. Outside of the courtroom, because this fight is not just in the courtroom. It's in different arenas. Anybody want to take it?
So what I'll say is, Equal Ground recognizes exactly what you just said about people not being aware of this, and so much so that after we filed our lawsuit, we hit the road and we did a multi-city, multi-county tour where we went to the impacted congressional districts and we had a forum to let people know, what was happening, and not only what was happening, but how they can play a larger role in, helping to shape the future and create the destiny that they desired, right? Because not enough people do know about this. And that's why it's important, that Alabama Values and all of the partners have assembled to have conversations such as this so that we can do a better job with educating our community. And one other thing, and I'll pass it over, is, we have to do a better job of starting early, right? Redistricting is a process that we know will happen every 10 years, like clockwork, right? And the old saying, there's two things you can guarantee, death and taxes. We'll add a third one, and that's redistricting, right? Because we know this is going to happen. And so we need to be positioning ourselves so that we're not caught, sort of sleep at the wheel next time this comes around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would just add that, we have, we have done so much work to make it accessible, right? You can go to our website, we've got a redistricting handbook that just kind of goes through the basics. What do you have the power to do as a citizen? And I was really proud, during the redistricting process to have the depth and breadth of community, because we had the elders who had been fighting this fight for 50 years. Then we also had young people like the former SGA president of Dillard University telling our legislators, she was like, we are leaving this state because we don't trust y'all to do the right thing. And we have fought and fought and fought for you guys and waited for you to do the right thing, and you're not. And so we're leaving. And, the brain drain is a real issue in the Deep South, and in particular in Louisiana. Even as, industry abounds, right? Our kids still choose to leave this place. And so, was really excited to see more young people engage in the conversation. And I think, we have to do more, but I also recognize that, in our state in particular, Black people are hurting, we want them to focus on all these different things. But, the reality is that COVID, almost, 70+% of all the women that were unemployed during COVID were Black and brown women. Think about that, right? And so and then 2 years later, what it takes for those families to recover. And so even as we are addressing, supporting, and helping build community voice and power, we also have to recognize how we meet people where they are so that they can hear these other things. Because if I'm not eating or my bills aren't being paid, I can't hear redistricting, right? And so we are trying to help. So one of the things that we also do that I think is so important, and I know Equal Ground does this too, and Florida Rising, and all my good friends, Seoku, Memphis Artists for Change, or they're good friends of mine in Memphis, and just all of these folks that are working literally to say, let me meet community where they are. Let's address real problems in real time. And then, oh yeah, there's this thing called redistricting that if we really want to, if we really like it, the highest ability and power we have to change it actually kind of lies right here. And so like, if you got to, we're going to address fines and fees on old tickets and other things. And I can do that right now at the same time that I'm saying, like, I'm gonna do this right now so that you can focus on redistricting. And so being able to really address and deal with real problems in real time for community at the same time that we're, kind of plowing the course towards, fair and equitably redistricting. We all do that work, Alabama. I mean, everyone on this panel today and many of our partners. And so it's one, again, like acknowledging the deep pain that's being felt in our communities, and then also helping our communities channel and funnel that deep pain into change, right? And into the power that says that, you're not hurting by accident. And COVID should have proved that to all of us. They're deciding whether you're safe in school. They're deciding whether you have access, to good jobs. They're deciding everything. They're deciding if you're safe at your job, right? And so making sure that people understand that, government is the cornerstone of all of this, and that if we want it to stay a democracy, we're going to have to fight for it.
Can I say that in Tennessee, we probably had the best mobilization around redistricting that we've had since I've been here. We had the worst outcome in part because of the legislature's a supermajority, and also the legislature knows they can get away with it if they have the 6th appellate circuit, which is our appellate circuit, backing them, and they got the judges backing them. Many of them came on. Some of them came on vis-a-vis the 2016 election, which makes sure we have to make sure we draw the linkage between the presidential election and appointments to the federal bench, and then what that means for redistricting later on. But as Ashley stated, the new redistricting cycle intersected with the George Floyd protests, with the election, with COVID, and so trying to make that a salient issue when folks are juggling how to survive, how to respond to elections, is quite challenging. In fact, one of our first we had many events, not just in NACP, who I worked with, but groups like I said, Civic Tennessee, League of Women Voters, Equity Alliance, and Turk, the immigrant rights groups. But one of the first major events that we did, community meetings, was with labor, and more specifically black labor unions, black labor union leaders and activists. And what we tried to do was to the best that we can, to make it less of a highbrow conversation and draw the linkage to meat and guts, everyday bread and butter issues. $1.6 trillion of federal funding goes to, are determined by congressional districts. And then we were able to possibly say something like, in Tennessee, when the community development block grants come to Tennessee, it's not just about congressional districts, but it's for the smaller cities that don't fit the formula of community development block grants. The governor determines often where those funds go, but it comes at the request of a member of the state legislature. So then we're able to say, okay, now who's in the state legislature can determine whether or not you get money for housing or for a road or something along those lines. So for us, it's trying to take, I'm not saying we did it in the best way. And not saying, especially me, because I could be kind of overly academic, but for us, it was trying to take a highbrow issue and also trying to link it to an everyday issue for folks. But what I try to do to the question is, the community redistricting effort, community-based redistricting, comes out of grassroots movement, Ella Baker, SNCC. The first effort that came out of it in terms of strategic effort really comes out of groups like Southern Echo, early 1990s, people who came out who were the offspring of SNCC, who basically took the kind of SNCC organizing Ella Baker model and implemented it through the redistricting process. And then they became involved in a kind of a national conversation around community-based redistricting. And so some of the trainings that occurred, for the last several decades involved folks out of the Mississippi kind of early 1990s kind of frame. So what we try to do is we're trying to make it much more down home language, that we much more indigenous to our story, indigenous to our history, and in order to make sure that people understand the importance. But it's very difficult, and it's constantly trying to have to do reminders, community meetings, linkages with grassroots organizations, and then we also try to link it to carceral reform because of prison-based gerrymandering, and how that oftentimes inhibits and impacts adversely communities of color, Black folks. And once we link the carceral issue, the prison issue, then people start to see, okay, yeah, this thing is wow. So people start to see it in a little bit different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think to your point about like bringing it home to people, is I had the opportunity to be speaking in the vote office. We were in Louisiana. Alabama Values was this past week, and I was in Vote, which is, I believe, Voice of the Experienced. So they're formerly incarcerated folks and people who work with formerly incarcerated folks to get the vote back. I was interviewing her for our documentary, and I was explaining prison gerrymandering to her, and I could see it click in real time. Like, she's like, wait, you're telling me they do this, but that means they've got all this power, and then all the incarceration facilities are in the white areas, and we know that they're incarcerating Black people. And I'm like, yeah, you're getting it. Like, yes. And it's, for me, it's when I'm talking to people, yes, I'm trying to meet them where they're at, but I'm also thinking, because redistricting touches so many issues, what are you already passionate about? And then let me show you how this issue impacts that. If you're talking to labor, yeah, how are these construction deals going down? How is this? But prison gerrymandering is huge, especially when we talk about the carceral states. In the South, especially with Louisiana being the #1 most incarcerated place in the world, Alabama being number 5, these are, when we talk about power, I think that's like one of those things that really gets down to power. But to Erlene's question, Alabama Values, I feel like sometimes redistricting is all we do. It's not. It's absolutely not. But we do try very hard to educate people, to get information out. We have a listserv. We have our social media is always on fire in the best way. That's at ALA Values. And we've in Alabama, we're in a very different space than every one of the states on here. This is something that I think was made very obvious to me when I was a fellow, because we'd be on these calls with the other Southern fellows, and I always assumed Alabama's in the same place as Mississippi, we're in the same place as Louisiana. No, we're behind. So this was our first statewide effort to coordinate against or with redistricting ever that I'm aware of, that I think anybody else who was organizing was aware of. It's not that there weren't individual people who were involved with redistricting beforehand, but there was never a coalition, a concerted effort. And that is, when Ashley talks about we had the 50-year-old, 50-year veterans talking with the youngsters, we don't have that history. And so we're really building it up as we go. But what that also means is that we're pretty locked into what people actually are feeling and talking about in the moment, because that's where we're at. Right. We don't have that removal, we're at the bare bones, the essentials, where we're building the base. But it does mean that we're in the trenches with people. So we're always connecting it to what issues are going on. We're always talking about reproductive health. We're always talking about all of these other issues and how they intersect with redistricting and with this issue. So I'm going to try to silver lining to it, because otherwise you start to be like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? But that's why we're all here, right? It is people's lives at the end of the day. We can dress it up however we want, but this money, whether money goes to rural hospitals, whether money goes to roads, whether money goes to ambulance services, that's somebody's life. That's important to remember. And that's something that we talk about a lot when we're talking to people one-on-one, is we're talking about these severe, I think all of us live in states with severe health access, lack of health access. We don't have expanded Medicaid. I don't remember if Louisiana does or not. But when there are, yes, it is difficult to talk to people who are hungry about redistricting, but at the same time, the reason you're hungry is because of redistricting. So that's how we let's feed you first, but then let's have a conversation about how this is happening, why this keeps happening.
Anisha, can I add one more to that if I can?
Yeah, no, go ahead, because I was going to double dutch and jump in.
I do want to go back. I do want to emphasize 2 points. That local redistricting was just a monster. I mean, and we have literally hundreds of, Alabama, Louisiana, hundreds of districts that were drawn. There's literally no oversight, no transparency. It's one map maker. It's a city
Finding
attorney.
out who the map maker is its
just,
own.
Yeah, it was just a monster, and it was one of the saddest. One of our legal counsels that was advising us civil rights groups, they actually came in to support local redistricting. But we got overwhelmed by what the state legislature did. And one of the saddest outcomes that I had to deal with was one of the counties that I thought we had a chance. They just didn't maybe meet the metrics. We just couldn't come in and file litigation on that. So I just want to make sure that it's and some of the local redistricting across the country is still not complete. Some of it's still not. So people want to be very mindful of that. And then secondly, I will say what's not in the redistricting kind of time frame of every 10 years, but what's extraordinarily important is the judicial districts. And the judicial districts don't have to follow the census apportionment redistricting process, but they fundamentally 100% impact incarceration. And there's a very small excerpt that Brian Stevenson you could barely catch it, that he refers to in his book Just Mercy, about the judicial districts in Alabama. Here in Tennessee, our judicial districts had not been drawn. They went from 1984 to 2019 before they were drawn, and even in 2019 it was still drawn in an unfair way. And so that's maybe the next kind of ground zero of focusing on how we can deal with that. But that's definitively affecting communities of color, Black folks.
Yeah, no, thank you. And what I like about Erlene's question is that when I read this, a lot of people are not aware that this is happening. And so what that brings to mind, I often tell folks when I go into spaces that folks are issue fatigued, and we have to stop siloing these issues, especially when they intersect, especially for Black folks. When you talk about intersectionality of issues, and that we have to start talking about, these issues in an intersectional way. And with redistricting, we can do that. Redistricting is connected to so many issues. And then also, just hearing everyone talk about what's happening in their state. I mean, this is why this initiative, Democracy Under Attack, was birthed, is because I saw, in following the narrative drumbeat, that there are coordinated attacks happening across the South, and these aren't one-off things, and that there is power in the collective. And so we need to start talking about these attacks together so that people can see that, hey, this is a coordinated effort, and it's going to take a collective approach, like for us to coordinate and fight back on this and collectively raise awareness that, what's happening in Alabama is happening in Louisiana, what's happening in Tennessee is happening in Florida, and vice versa. And so really empowering folks with knowledge so that when it is time to, engage and mobilize communities, they are aware of what is happening and how it's connected to them and how the role that they play in the solution. Let's see. We have another question. Is there a connection between disparities in education and Black communities and their underrepresentation in school boards, city councils, and state legislatures? Ashley?
Absolutely. I literally wrote it in the chat. I mean, I think that, I have said all along, once the Supreme Court said Section 2 was the law of the land, run me all my power. I want my congressional seat. I want my state house seats. I want my state senate seats. I want my school board seats. I want my city council seats. I want all of them. Police, jury, whatever you got going on. I want all of my seats. Because that's what's real, right? Is that like, if the people of Louisiana want to try to change the things that don't work about our state, we can't do that if we don't have elected leaders that are going to listen to us and be accountable to us. And, and so I totally agree with you. Like, this is the time to fight. But I do think it is also, we have multiple lawsuits. So there's there's a congressional map lawsuit, but there's also the state seats lawsuits. We have several school board lawsuits, but to the point that was made earlier, like there's only so much capacity, right? Like, I mean, it's like at the end of the day, like we're going to try to gather up as much power, as possible. But, there's 64 parishes in this, which are counties, if you will, in the state of Louisiana. And so that's a lot of places to, try to push, like kind of push down to make sure that everybody is being accountable to what the law of land is. And I think, and I think it's like, what I'm hopeful is that the court could remedy this in a better way, right? Like when Louisiana finally declared non-unanimous juries, we saw that, like it was an instant, like the decision was made and then, people had recourse, right? And not just recourse 5 years from now, but like recourse in that very moment. And so maybe it's something that the courts can remedy around, like, why is this taking so long? And then in Louisiana, we know the map drawers and we know the fact that if they told me who the map drawer was, I can tell you if the map was going to be equitable or not. And I only met one or two of them that, would even be willing to entertain a conversation about equity in these maps and went out of their way to, to limit, voice. But absolutely, there's so much power, and the closer the power is to where you live, the more impact it's having on your lives. And so if you're talking about your city council, your mayor, your school board, absolutely, that is having an extreme impact on, on your quality of life. And we need to be able to go and claim all that power. And so it was teasing the nation. That's what I keep saying, like, run me all of my power, all of it. And I'm immediately, like immediately.
Yeah. And don't be surprised if there's a checklist that comes out somewhere on the ways that you can run me all my power, just in case you don't know how. Like, so sponsored by
it's not complicated. It didn't have to be, it's not complicated, because again, when we need expediency, for other things to be, moved very quickly for justice, then, it happens. But it's somehow when we're talking about, power and justice for Black and brown folks, justice, the wheels turn real slow. And so we have to really figure out a solution at scale, because I feel like, they can wear us out fighting all of these fights at every level of government. And by the time we get to a place that, we're winning, it's time to do it all over again. And so, at some point, we have to get to a place where, like the law matters, right? Because at this point, it's like they upheld Section 2 and then are slow walking everything, and it's problematic. So we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. So, and I know we have a few minutes left, and what I want to do at this time is I would love for everyone to give some closing remarks. And really, when we talk about connecting redistricting to everyone's front door, I encourage you let your closing remarks do that. Like if it's an issue that you feel resonates right now, that your organization is working on, but what are those parting words? What do you say to someone who's watching this and now, after seeing this, is like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that this was happening, and they're like, I need to do something. So what do you say to that person that has been awakened to the ways that their power is being diluted? And as Ashley so eloquently put it, that power is due, and now they're ready to tell someone to run them their power. So what do you say to those that are, that are watching? I would love to kick it off with just some parting words. And who wants to volunteer to go first?
I can take it first. So, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to join and, talk about this very important issue, because, democracy is truly under attack. And, in a republic where our voting rights and our ability to select folks to represent us in government means everything, right? It's important that we get it right. And so thank you for making space to have this conversation. Obviously, redistricting is vitally important, but one of the things that I want to use my closing to talk about is when Seoku talked about the judicial, reappointment or reapportionment, so to speak, of the judicial circuits. I cannot underscore that enough. In Florida, we are actually in the midst of that, right? And so what we're seeing is the state of Florida is looking to consolidate our judicial districts. And we know this is nothing more than an attempt to consolidate and control power. And they're doing this in the backdrop of suspending duly elected state attorneys and folks who are trying to administer justice on behalf of the voters who elected them to do their job. And, please take this warning. We're sounding the alarm that this is happening. This is something that we need to be paying attention to. And a state as large as Florida, with the unprecedented growth that we continue to see in Florida, there's no reason that we should be consolidating anything. If anything, we should be adding, right? But we know, like I said, the reason that they want to do that. So that's really the next fight here in between the redistricting fights, because again, we know redistricting is coming again, after the 2030 census, but that fight in between is going to be over these judicial circuits and these judicial maps, because we know that, we need to have equity in our criminal justice system. And so, again, thank you for this space and for this time. You can stay connected with us in Florida. You can text the word Fair Districts to 52886. One word, Fair Districts to 52886. Learn more about our redistricting work. If you want to stay connected with Equal Ground, we're on all the social media platforms. You can email us at info@equalground.com. Our website is there, equal-ground.com. And you can also text Equal Ground, one word, to 52886 as well. Again, Equal Ground 52886. So thank you, and looking forward to continuing the conversation at another time.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, I just put in the chat that, there's so much justice family that connects all of our states and that have been parts of these fights. And so again, just to always appreciate Alabama values, bringing together good folks, fighting the fight. Reminds us that we're not alone, and that there are those of us that have, that have the fight in us to keep going one day longer. And so Louisiana, I would say, one of the things that's really important for us is that, when we realize this second district, it brings down, we only have one current district, which is about 60% African-American. And once we establish the second one, it'll bring both districts to around 54-55%. And one of the things that, has been said is that, oh, well, you guys are going to end up with no district, because how are you going to get Black people to vote? And I laugh at that, because I was just like, well, I don't, Power Coalition may have not have been around the last time, but Power Coalition is here. We're going to make sure that we engage our voters in the process of really standing in their power. So it's like, one thing is about like, we've used our power to win something, and then how do we actually help people stand in that power? And so if you want to get engaged in our redistricting process, go to powercoalition.org, which is our website. There's a whole section on redistricting guides, redistricting information. And we'd love for you to get involved. You want to learn more? You want us to come out and talk to your community, whatever's happening, let us know. And we are more than happy to have these conversations, because what we know will be critical is not only to win power, but the whole power. And so for Louisiana, that big push is, most immediate elections on Friday. So we have our primary on Friday for every statewide seat, as well as every House and Senate seat, and many, many other things on the ballot. So I encourage everybody to go vote. If you need a sample ballot, you can also find that at powercoalition.org. And following these elections, the other piece will be gearing up for 2024 and making sure that we do indeed have candidates of choice in these two minority districts. But thank you for having me, and always glad to be in company with good folks.
Thank you.
I can go next. Yeah. Again, thanks for having me. I greatly appreciate everybody's work. I guess mine would be maybe more inspirational and then maybe aspirational, I guess, is that the work that folks are doing across the South, including on this webinar, it's so very important. I can't tell you how much that, if folks don't ever talk to other folks in other states, allies, folks are watching. And not just watching, but gaining inspiration. I could tell you as Alabama was moving forward, folks were cheering. Folks were looking at what was going on in Louisiana. Florida's a minefield everywhere you go. So no one knows what's going on in Florida. But I can tell you for a fact that not only are folks watching, but in everything that happens, the non-unanimous jury fight, the debate about, voter restoration, and it inspires and it gives folks, even if we never touch each other, folks hope, because we have a lot of walls that we're running up against. So I want to make sure I point that out. I think that for the redistricting thing, I think constantly developing new leaders and training folks, because the redistricting cycles are so far apart that we see new people who come in, new cars starting all over in some cases. And this was the first election cycle in which I'm a political scientist, so I've done expert reports as well on redistricting, and we're seeing a wave of retirements of folks that have left the field. So constantly developing new leaders, constantly educating the folks. The last two things I'll say is that number three is that trying to understand the interior of decision-making process, not just elected officials, but here in Tennessee, for local redistricting, for county governments, county commissions, school boards, city councils, that's done by people in the planning department. And who can also be muscled, quite frankly, by city council members who want redistricts done in a certain way. And most people don't even know that. It's done by one or two people who are leveraged one way or the other. And so trying to understand the interior of decision-making that occurs in these states and local governments that are having real impact on folks, not just on redistricting, but legal departments, legal divisions and city governments that are making decisions that impact people. So that's also an important issue. And then finally, I'll say, because we just went through this Tennessee 3 expulsion thing, but the one thing I learned from that is, and maybe folks on the call, is how much the national audience really does not understand the South. It's almost as if they talk about the South as if it's straight out of central casting, like it's a Western movie showdown, and it can be articulated in that way. So I think for us on the call and for the audience, we have to tell the world what does the South look like, and what do the mini Souths look like? What's the difference between Arkansas and Tennessee versus Louisiana? We have a new South as well, of new Americans rather, who are in the South. We have a complicated history. So really finding a way to educate the audience about what does the South look like, and why we can't give up on the South. The South is where we are.
Awesome.
I guess that leaves me with the ending pitch. So, I mean, please follow Alabama Values at ALA Values, especially if you're in Alabama. Even if you're not and you want to get inspiration. Again, the most important thing, if you live in Alabama, that you can take away from this is to look at the new map that was passed and figure out what district you're in, what congressional district you're in, because that information will not be updated anytime soon. If you are a voter education org, we need to be talking about how to get that information out to people. I know that us at Alabama Values, we're going to be thinking a lot. We just got back from Louisiana, so give us a minute, y'all. But we're going to be thinking a lot about how do we want to visually represent to people, hey, maybe we make something where you can figure out your district, or how are we going to talk about this? But that is something we are going to be doing that is ongoing. Also, to Seku's point, in 2025, a whole bunch of local redistricting is going to happen. So this is not just about getting ready for 2030. This is about getting ready for basically next year, and in your own local communities. And I can tell you, as one of 4 fellows, and we've been teaching people along the way. But the more people that know what's going on in their own local community, the better. Because there's nothing in Alabama that says that they have to hold a public hearing. They don't have to tell you about any, they have to in some way say that they're going to redistrict, but that could be literally a notice on a courtroom door. We've seen that before, as that's considered giving notice. I don't know how many of y'all walk by the courtroom on a daily basis. So these kinds of things, right? We at Alabama Values, we want to help as much as we can, but also we're not there's not clones of us across the state. So also letting us know, hey, I think there might be some redistricting happening in my local community, things like that. So I also do a webinar series called They Better Get These Lines Right. We have a heck of an episode to do after Alabama's new maps came out. So we're firing on all cylinders here, y'all. And this is an amazing group of folks. And Seoku, I just want to particularly thank you for being on today, because something that I've been talking about a lot is the need for interaction and for coordination between political scientists, folks who are experts in the field, and the organizers. Because in Alabama we have a dearth of political scientists who focus on this issue, and so really kind of building up, like you said, the next generation of political scientists, especially those who are versed in the South, in how all these issues intersect. There are, I'm sure much better than I do, that there are particularities to how each state government is set up that adds another layer of gerrymandering that if you don't know, you wouldn't see it. So the way that Jefferson County is split 7 ways in our state government maps is actually a form of gerrymandering. But if you don't understand home rule and like state, the committee system, you wouldn't know that. And I'm sure that's the case in Louisiana. I'm sure there's a whole nother level of it in Florida. So we have this need for local experts as well. So that I will end it on that. And I'm very hopeful with where we're going with this.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Zephyr. That is our time for this evening. Thank you all for joining us. This will also be reshared on social media. We'll be cutting some bite-sized gems and resharing on social media so that you can share within your online communities that you're trusted messengers in. There are folks that need this information, and we all play a part in that. Again, thank you to our panelists, and we'll leave you with a quick video just reminding you that democracy is under attack and we must fight back. And in the words of Ashley, I think I'll close out with "Run me my power."
Attention, our democracy